G'day friends, family, fellow patriots. Lord Stompy here in Adelaide, South Australia. Welcome. This video is part 2 in my video series on modern liberalism being the new dark ages. Now, in my first video, I introduced this concept, and if you want to watch that, there's a link down below. And before we proceed with the second part in my series, I would like to thank a couple of my patrons who have donated money to my channel. Thank you very much. I am very grateful. Now, for those of you who would like to help me out, I am a professional musician and music teacher. There is a link below to my music, which is for sale, and feel free to check out my original music online, and occasionally people do actually support me by buying my music. So on with part 2. The Dark Ages, this modern world. We're here now. This is it. I literally came to this conclusion like today. And I said in my first video, I basically knew 10 years ago a dark ages was coming. But then today I really thought about it, and I suddenly just clicked. I was like, post-war liberalism, that is the dark ages. And I gave a few reasons why in that video, but the main reason why was I was looking at the peak eras of our European nations, and they were all hundreds of years ago. You know, the last time Britain was, which is my homeland, most of my ancestry is Welsh and Scottish. I have a very small amount of Maori in me. My father was from New Zealand, so he's got a bit of tribal blood in him, and so do I. But most of my heritage is Welsh and Scottish. My grandma on one side was completely Welsh. She was a classic Welsh woman. My father on the other side, with a bit of Maori in him. He was a Scots descendant. Essentially, my mother was mostly British, but from around the Manchester area, so getting quite a lot more northern. That's my heritage. The last time Britain did anything great, really, was basically before World War One. I mean, from World War One onwards, basically the only great thing, really, that England did was slowly destroy itself and its colonies. It was a long, slow process, but that's the way it rolls. And that's how the Dark Ages have crept into our empire. People intent on picking the empire apart just a little bit here. A different person thinks, I'll pick it apart a little bit here. Another person thinks, well, I'll just do a little bit of stealing and corruption here. And this kind of behavior multiplies behind the scenes, and very soon you have no empire left. You're basically being run by a bunch of criminals and thieves, which is where we are at today. This is pretty much the main way that empires fall, in my humble opinion. And many other people have come to the same conclusion as me, many great people. So, the great European empires of Spain, Portugal, the Dutch, France had a bit of it had some overseas colonies, England, and there was, for quite a while, France did own a lot of Europe as well. We were quite incredible people. Our heyday was hundreds of years ago. That was the point of my last video. I look back, all our great achievements as European people, as European nations, were essentially hundreds of years ago. We have, ever since the 20th century, and especially since the end of World War II, our European people and our nations have just become increasingly fragmented. Now, this has been to a large part by design. To a large part. There's another part of this equation, which is the general corruption of the average people. The general corruption of the ruling classes, but also of the middle classes and the middle management as well. A nation can survive with corrupt leaders. It can even survive a series of corrupt leaders. But if the middle class and the middle management retain their nationalistic patriotism and their loyalty, their in-group preference for their people, generally a nation will survive its corrupt leaders. When things go really bad is when your middle classes and your middle management all start to join in the corruption, because then it means that you've got almost no one in any position of power at all within your own nation who has the best interests of the nation at heart. That is what we have seen especially since the end of World War II, under liberalism here in the West. Post-war liberalism has been absolute poison for the European people and the European nations. Look around you. What do you see? This is the product of post-war liberalism. Now, the people who pushed post-war liberalism the most, other than the Jewish media and the Jewish legal classes and the Zog politicians, were the idiot, naive middle classes and middle management. Hippie retard boomers like my parents. They all thought, when I grew up in the 1980s, I was a wee little kid, and in the 90s, as I became a teenager and a young man, my parents were just pushing Kalergi, Globo, Homo, retarded idealism as far as they possibly could. And most of their friends were as well. So the middle classes, from the boomer era on especially, the middle classes almost completely had capitulated to basically Western liberalism. An incredibly destructive force, an incredibly destructive mindset. It's a force and a mindset that only completely hubristic, deluded people could embrace. And the proof is, just look around you at our civilization now. Does any Western nation now look like the nation of mighty warriors and super intellectual high achievers that our ancestors were 200 years ago? So what was the factors of our ancestors only 200 years ago, which isn't that long ago on a time, go back even 150 years. Well, for a start, they were all devout Christians. They were as loyal to the church and to Jesus as they were to the state. So essentially, they were Christian fanatics. The vast majority of our ancestors who built up our Western nations into the great mighty nations that they are, that they were. I wouldn't say they're great or mighty anymore. Our Christian ancestors who built the Western nations up were die-hard Christian fanatics. They had a huge amount of in-group preference for their people, for their nation, and they were willing to fight and die for their nation and for their church as well. This is an incredibly important factor. If you have somebody who is a Christian fanatic, that means they are a religious zealot. That means that they're willing to fight and die for their spiritual beliefs. It means that they believe in life after death. They believe that there is a great spiritual world beyond our own, and it makes them far less afraid of dying when they realize this. And this is a similar kind of fanaticism that we still see now today with the more hardline Islamic people. And I'm no fan of hardline Islamism. Not at all. But I recognize it with a grudging respect as an incredibly powerful motivating force to get Islamic people to collectivize, to fight in their own interests. And this is a reason why the really die-hard Muslims aren't afraid to die on the battlefield, because they are religious fanatics. They're religious zealots. This is what our ancestors used to be like, except they were Christians. They were European Christians. This is an incredibly important factor. Why don't people here in the liberal West want to fight or die for their people or their nation anymore? Well, a really big part of that answer is nobody is a religious fanatic anymore. There is no fanaticism under the cult of liberalism, Judeo-liberalism, right? Religious fanaticism is seen as being toxic, deluded, evil. It's seen as being a great evil. And the reason why that flabby, limp-wristed liberalism would see, has always seen religious fanaticism as evil, is because religious fanaticism breeds warriors who no longer think for themselves, but they think for a greater cause. Religious fanaticism breeds idealistic warriors who are ready to die for their cause. Now, the only thing that truly scares the modern liberal regime is large groups of people who are willing to collectivize against all the odds and who are willing to fight and die for their cause. Because under the dark misrule of modern liberalism, the main motivating force that motivates the masses to get out of bed and basically do their work and do their duty for the state is self-interest. Complete materialistic self-interest. There is no higher guiding principles above the average people in the West now. You know, here and there you'll get the odd Christian fanatic in the Western world, but they're very scattered. They're far apart, and they tend not to collectivize very much. And on top of that, most of the Christian fanatics that are left have lost their European fighting spirit. They're more interested in capitulating and appeasing than standing up and fighting to the death like our ancestors were. It's an incredible difference. What you're seeing now is literally 150 years ago in any Western nation, if you were getting millions of people, these pagan hordes that are flooding the West now, these Asiatics, these Indians, all the various other minority people, Africans. If you had this happening in any Western nation to any large degree 150 years ago, the average European 150 years ago, they were fanatically loyal to their nation and their people, and they were fanatic Christians, and they would have seen this as paganistic heathen hordes invading their country who needed to be repelled with force, with might. And they would have had no problem flexing their muscles on those hordes. And indeed, that is the only thing that ever stops massive hordes of pagans and heathens from invading your country. That's why Europe has been Europe for well over 1,000 years. It's because we always repelled all the pagan hordes of people who are different from us. This is a no-brainer. And then since post-war liberalism took the reins of our nations, the complete opposite has become the moral good of our nations. As open the floodgates of your nations and welcome in these dark-skinned pagan hordes as your brothers and sisters. So this is a complete inversion of any natural order. And once again, it reiterates my belief and my worldview that we are now actually already under the Dark Ages, because this has been the common way of thinking with the common European man for most of my life, especially in the liberal middle class circles that I grew up in. The liberal middle classes, meh. You know, sorry to the few boomers who are based and who watch my channel. I know there's a couple of you, and you hate it when I say fucking boomers, but truly, man, the boomers I grew up and was surrounded with, I look back now, I'm just like, oh my god, these guys ushered in the dark ages with open arms, man. They you know, I mean, let's face it, they were essentially, the hippies were the first wave of pagans themselves. What were they all doing? They were all having orgies, taking heaps of drugs, going crazy at Led Zeppelin concerts. My hippies like my mum and dad was swooning over Mick Jagger gyrating around on stage. I mean, what is that? All of this stuff was just pagan ritualism. It's all it ever has been. Right? So, especially here in Australia, I'm sure it's the same in England, perhaps less so in America. All this kind of populist entertainment for my entire life, and the popular way of thinking is actually just being crypto paganism. You know, what is a rock concert, for God's sake? You know, I almost no rock stars I know are devout Christians of any sort. It's a pagan festival. That's it's how it's been all my life. These are the new dark ages. You know, Christianity was an age of light for Europe, and now the post-war liberalism has plunged us deep into the dark ages, and it's only going to get worse. So hang on for the ride, friends. God bless you all. Deus Volt.